So if you're a druid or maybe a sorcerer who does primal spell tradition, also witches and summoners who also do primal spell tradition, or you really would like to know more about the natural world and command and train animals, then the nature skill just might be the skill you want to invest some time and some effort into and kind of get that proficiency level up. My name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, the nature skill is a wisdom based skill, and what it really is about is knowing about the natural world and knowing how to command and train animals and magical beasts. And it kind of encompasses all the things you might think it would encompass: fauna, flora, geography, weather, the environment, creatures of a natural origin like animals, beasts, fae, plants. There's also the first world, the material plane, and the elemental planes. And once again, if you are a druid or one of the spellcasters that can take primal as their particular tradition, then it's a very good skill to have. Just as a very quick kind of aside here, remember that nature corresponds to primal, occultism corresponds to occult, religion corresponds to divine, and arcana translates to arcane. So, with that, let's go ahead and start talking about the untrained actions in nature. Our untrained action in nature is recall knowledge. Recall knowledge is a single action that you can do. It does require the concentration and the secret trait. And remember, with the secret trait, generally speaking, the GM is going to be rolling for you. It is a secret check, and that is pretty much at most tables. It is always up to interpretation of whatever they want to do at the table, but in general, it is going to be a secret check. So you will not know the results. What you are trying to do is to attempt a skill check to try to remember a little bit of knowledge regarding the topic. And for this one, it will be nature or primal. Once again, it is generally going to be about fauna, flora, geography, the weather, the environment, creatures like animals, beasts, fae, and plants, as well as the first world, the material plane, and the elemental planes. The GM will generally determine the difficulty class or DC for such checks. And I'll probably need to do another maybe quick tip for this, but specificity matters. So if it is something that is specific to nature, then your nature check is going to be, generally speaking, your best roll for it as far as what the DC of that particular check might be. This does have the normal success conditions. So on a critical success, you do recall the knowledge accurately, or maybe you gain a clue about what your current situation is, and you will generally gain some additional information or maybe context for the information you already received. On a success, you do recall the knowledge accurately, or you might gain a clue about what your current situation is, but generally speaking, that's all you're going to be getting. You really won't get additional information like you would with a critical success, like maybe context for what that information applies to. On a failure, you kind of just don't recall anything, and that's pretty much all you get. You just really don't know anything about that particular topic at this particular moment in time. And on a critical failure, oh, you remember something, but it's probably incorrect. You basically have an erroneous or misleading clue. But let's go ahead and move on to some of our trained actions. Now, identify magic is a trained action, and it is something you can do if you were trained in nature. It does have the concentrate, exploration, and secret trait, which once again means that the GM is generally going to be doing a secret roll for you and you won't know the results. It could be different at other tables, but in general, by the book, that would be how the secret check would go. And what you're trying to do is you are trying to identify a certain magic. Once you discover that an item or location or an ongoing effect is magical, you will spend 10 minutes trying to identify the particulars of that particular magic. If your attempt is interrupted, unfortunately, you have to start over. So let's say you got 8 minutes into the attempt and someone interrupts you or a monster comes in. Once all that's settled down, you have to start all over again with another 10 minutes. If it is a cursed or maybe it's some really obscure or esoteric knowledge, it might take longer, or you might not be able to do it, or the DC could be much higher than you would expect it to be. It does have the normal success conditions, just like anything else. On a critical success, you learn all the attributes of the magic, including its name and whatever its effect is, what it does, any means of activating it for an item, and some type of locations, and whether it is cursed. On a success for an item or location, you get a general sense of what it will do as well as how to activate it. For an ongoing effect, maybe like a spell with a duration, you will learn the effect's name and what it does. Now, you cannot try to do another Identify Magic in order to get a critical success. Once you've done the Identify Magic, then you're pretty much stuck with that result if you already succeeded. On a failure, you basically fail to identify that type of magic and you can't try again for another day. And on a critical failure, this kind of goes along with any knowledge-based skill, that on a critical failure, you think you identified it, but you're totally wrong. Or it could be something even worse based on the GM's choice. So let's go ahead and move on to the last trained action for nature. Our last trained action is learn a spell. It does have the concentrate and exploration trait, but it does not have the secret trait, so you'll be rolling this yourself. It does have a requirement, and the requirement is that you have a spell casting class feature, and the spell you want to learn is in your magical tradition. So for nature, it needs to be in the primal tradition. If you do have a multi-tradition caster, then you could use whatever skill for that particular type of magical tradition that you're trying to do it for, but you couldn't use nature for an arcana spell. What you are doing is you are trying to gain access to a new spell of your tradition from someone who knows that spell, or a written text, or maybe a spell book, and put those into your own. There are some things that you must do in order to learn a spell. You must spend an hour per level of the spell with a person who's trying to teach you that spell, or with the written text out in front of you studying that particular text. You must have the cost of the materials needed that are indicated in this table, and I'll go ahead and pop that up there. And you must attempt a skill check determined by the GM based on the DC of the same table. But remember that if something is uncommon or rare, it could have a higher DC, and that is something that the GM is going to have to decide. If you have a spell book, once you learn that spell, it will go in your spell book. If you prepare spells from a list, then it's going to be added to your list. And if you have a spell repertoire, then you can select it when you add and swap spells. It does have the normal success conditions, just like everything else. On a critical success, you learn the spell, but you only spend half of the material cost that you needed to spend. So for a second level spell, as opposed to the 6 golds, you'd only spend 3. On a success, you learn the spell and you also expend the materials needed. On a failure, you just don't learn the spell, but you do get to keep the materials that needed to be expended in order to learn that spell. And on a critical failure, you don't learn the spell and you lose half of the materials that needed to be expended in order to learn that spell. There is one difference here, I will say, is that there is no decipher writing for the nature skill. So that's not something, even though it is a knowledge-based skill like occultism or religion, it does not have that, but it does have something else, and that is the action Command an Animal. Command an Animal is a single action. It does have the auditory as well as the concentrate trait. Auditory because you're going to have to attempt to command an animal. You issue an order to an animal. You will attempt a nature check against the animal's will DC. The GM might adjust the DC if the animal has a good attitude towards you, or you suggest an action that it was kind of predisposed to, like if it was going to attack a creature and you command it to attack a creature, it's going to be easier for you to get it to attack a creature, or if you offer it a treat. So maybe some Scooby snacks in your bag if you want to be a commanding animal nature character might be a good idea. You automatically fail if the animal is hostile or unfriendly towards you, but if the animal is helpful towards you, you increase your degree of success on whatever roll you make. So if it was already helpful to you and you rolled a success, you would get a critical success. If you rolled a failure, you would get a success instead. Now, there are feats in the book that might allow you to command an animal a little bit better. And one of the ones, the example they gave from the book is called Ride, and we'll pop that up here. So most animals will know the drop, prone, or down, leap, seek, stand, stride, and strike basic actions. So these are things that you can pretty commonly just give to command an animal. If an animal knows an activity, such as a horse's gallop, you can command an animal to perform that activity, but you must spend as many actions on command an animal as the creature is going to be doing that activity. So if you were to command a horse to stride 3 times, then you will spend 3 actions in order to get that to work. You can also spend multiple actions to command an animal to have that animal do something on the next turn, such as the example I gave before, which is stride 3 times, or potentially do something like stride twice and strike, or maybe do a strike, step, and then stride. It does have success conditions. On a success, the animal does as you command on its next turn. On a failure, the animal is going to act hesitant or resistant, and whatever you asked it to do just isn't going to work. And on a critical failure, the animal is going to misbehave, or maybe it misunderstands and it's going to take some other action determined by the GM. An example of that might be you would tell a creature to strike. And instead of striking, what it does is it runs away, or it steps, or it jumps over the creature. So these are things that could happen on a critical failure. Now, there is a sidebar for command an animal, and there's some good information in there. Issuing commands to an animal isn't always going to go as you planned it to go. Animals are sentient and independent, which means, but they do have a limited intelligence. So most animals are only going to understand basic commands. If you try to give an animal a really complex command, it is probably not going to go well. And a good example of this from the sidebar is you might command an animal to go to a specific square on the grid, but trying to get that animal to go on a specific path to that square in the grid, maybe to avoid difficult terrain or maybe to avoid getting injured, isn't something that you can really do with a big degree of success. You can pretty much just tell it to go someplace and it will go there however it gets there. And the GM is going to decide the specifics based on the type of animal that you have. Now, if you do command an animal, the animal is going to do what you tell it to. Well, if you succeeded, it's going to do what you tell it to on its next turn, usually as the first action. And if you successfully commanded it multiple times, it will do it in that order. However, if it takes more than one turn, it's going to forget after that turn is over. So you would have to redo the command an animal in order to get it past the 3 actions it could do in its turn. If multiple people command the animal, then the GM is going to determine which person the animal is going to respond to. And the GM might also adjust the DC if someone unsuccessfully tried to command an animal in that same round, because the animal is just going to kind of get confused. Now, I hope you enjoyed this guide on the nature skill. It is a really good skill if you do want to know a lot of things about nature, if you really want to be a druid or have any type of caster in the primal tradition, then the nature skill is really going to give you knowledge, give you a better chance to learn spells, give you a better chance to identify magic that might be happening within your campaign, your setting, or your adventure path. So if it's something that is really going to be prevalent in what you're playing, it's a really good skill to have. Now, I do hope you liked this video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.